For this lesson, we will continue painting with a limited palette of primary colors. In addition to the primaries, you can also use white. Start with a light pencil drawing of the object that you want to paint. Begin by setting up your palette. Mix the primaries to make some secondary colors. My suggestion is to make a dark, a medium, and a light version of that secondary color that you need. Here is the image of the pepper I was working from. I was working from life, so I could really see the highlights, those darker values, and the cast shadow. This is really important. As I'm looking at the pepper, I'm trying to match the colors. I'm using a little bit more blue for the shadowy areas and a little bit more yellow for the highlighted areas. I'm also going to mix a few neutrals. I'm taking my greens and I'm mixing a little bit of red into that green. Red and green are complements, so they make a nice brown. Select and create a color for your background using any of your primaries and maybe some white. It's usually best to paint the background first, because your object can sit on top of the background and you can create better edges that way. Once you have the background finished, go ahead and put some color into the object that you're painting. In this case, I'm creating a green pepper. I'm looking at the values and I'm going to work on creating a coat of paint, paying attention to where the darks and the lights are. This layer of paint does not have to be perfect. You're going to build up more paint on top of this to create a more dimensional look. Once you have that first layer of color down on your object, go ahead and start looking at the values. Look at the shapes of the values. It really helps if you can define the shape of the darker areas and the brighter areas and layer them on top of each other. As I continue, I will add a little bit of the neutral color to some of my greens. This will help me create more value and more variations in the pepper. As I continue, I add finer details. I take a smaller brush and more variations in the color. And I'll continue to go in and layer in those finer details, the little cast shadows, the highlights, the little imperfections in my fruit or my vegetable. Showing contrast with those highlights and those darker shadows will really make your fruit or vegetable pop and look three-dimensional on your page. Sometimes we think a highlight would be white, but it really isn't. And the color of the highlight will change depending on what the color of the object is. Here I'm using a yellow for my highlight. I've mixed the yellow with a little bit of the green from the body of the pepper, and this really helps me keep the colors so they're consistent and they blend nicely. complements when mixing paints is really important. That's how you will neutralize the colors. So mixing a little bit of red into green will help you make that green look a little earthier and more realistic. Other complementary pairs are blue and orange or purple and yellow. Don't forget to add that cast shadow. The cast shadow will ground your object. Here I'm just thinning out my paint with water. I'm taking that neutral color, adding a little bit of blue to cool it down, and painting it over my background in the shape of the cast shadow. I'm layering my cast shadow so it's darker near the object, where the object meets the ground, and then it fades out as it goes a little bit further. You can also mix the paint with medium. A matte medium can work really well for this. It will give you a translucent coat of paint, but it won't be so runny as if you're mixing it with water. Look closely at the cast shadow. How many different values do you see in the cast shadow? You can always let the shadow dry and then go back and add another layer. Typically, right where the object meets the ground, there's the darkest part of the cast shadow. So with just 3 primary colors and white, you can do quite a bit. Here you can see that I created those darker areas by adding a little more blue to my paint, and the highlighted areas by adding a little more yellow and white to my paint to make them brighter. What colors can you make with just 3 colors? So pick a blue, pick a yellow, pick a red, and see what you can do. To compare, the image on the left uses 3 primaries unmixed, straight out of the tube. The image on the right uses the same 3 primaries plus white mixed to create a variety of colors and values.